One night, my daughter locked me in my own bedroom and took my keys. By morning. Everything changed. Vanessa said, "Sit down, Mom." Not like an invitation but like a command, and I understood immediately that this was not a family talk but a verdict already decided, with Caleb standing just behind her shoulder, arms crossed, watching me the way people watch something they intend to manage rather than listen to. I sat, because refusing would have turned into proof of whatever story they were preparing to tell, and the first thing I noticed was the pile on the table, a bank notice with bold red lettering, printed emails, and overdue statements laid out neatly as if my life had already been summarized into evidence. I asked quietly, "What is going on?" And Vanessa snapped back without missing a beat. "Do not play innocent. This is because of you." Her voice sharp with a resentment that sounded practiced. She leaned forward and said, "You always do this. You pretend to be calm while everything around you falls apart." And then she added the sentence she knew would sting, "You live like it is 50 years ago, and it makes me look like I came from nothing." Caleb cleared his throat and stepped in with the tone he uses when he wants to sound reasonable, saying, "Jane, you do not really understand credit or timelines, so it is better if you do not interfere right now." And then, glancing pointedly at my purse, "With your condition, it is probably safer if you do not hold on to your keys tonight." I felt my stomach tighten, and I said evenly, "Those are mine." Because that much at least was still true. And Vanessa's face hardened as she reached across the table and grabbed my car keys, my house keys, and my phone in one motion, dropping them into her pocket like confiscated contraband. "You are agitated," she said loudly, as if narrating for an invisible audience. "You are not thinking clearly." And when I took a step toward her, she raised her voice and said, "See, this is exactly what I mean. Mom, you are not stable tonight. I am doing this to protect you." If you are listening right now and something in your chest feels tight, if you recognize how quickly concern can turn into control when someone wants your silence more than your safety, then you already understand why moments like this change people. And if you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button and let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away, because your support helps bring understanding and love to people who are told they no longer deserve either. Thank you so much, and please keep listening. Caleb did not stop her. He did not question her. He simply added quietly, "If you calm down and do as we ask, this will be easier for everyone," which is what people say when they want compliance without accountability. I told them again, slower this time, "Give me my phone." And Vanessa laughed, not humor, but irritation, and said, "You do not need it. You will just make things worse," before placing her hand on my arm and steering me toward the hallway with a firmness that crossed from guidance into force. "Mom, stay in your room tonight," she said, her voice suddenly gentle in the way that feels more dangerous than shouting. "Do not come out, and do not embarrass us anymore." I stopped in front of my bedroom door and said, "You cannot do this." And Caleb leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne and whispered, "If you start yelling, we will tell them you are confused, and people believe daughters, especially when mothers get old." The word old landed harder than any insult, because it was the justification for everything they were about to do. Vanessa pushed me inside, closed the door, and I heard the lock turn from the outside with a sound that was unmistakable and final, a clean click that traveled through my body like ice. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, trying it, once, twice, before understanding that this was no longer an argument. It was confinement, and the air felt different when that realization settled. I did not scream because screaming would have given them exactly what they needed, proof that I was unstable, and instead I sat down on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding hard but my thoughts strangely clear. They were not trying to calm me, they were trying to contain me, and the papers on the table, the notices, the rehearsed lines, all pointed to the same conclusion, that by morning they planned to put something in front of me to sign while I was tired, frightened, and isolated. I pressed my palms together and breathed slowly, feeling fear without letting it run me. Because somewhere beneath the shock another memory surfaced, not of my daughter, but of myself, sitting in an attorney's office years ago after a minor surgery, insisting on safeguards I had hoped I would never need, Clauses meant for emergencies, for worst cases, for moments when love is used as leverage. As the house fell quiet outside my door and I heard footsteps retreat, I understood with a clarity that surprised me that this night was not about discipline or protection, it was about access, and while they believed they had locked me in, they had forgotten one important thing. I had prepared for being underestimated, and that preparation was still very much within my reach. I was not raised to ask for permission or rescue, and that shaped everything I became, for better and for worse. I grew up in Nebraska, in a house where money was counted twice before it was spent, and pride was the only thing we were allowed to have in excess. My parents did not talk about feelings the way people do now. They talked about responsibility, about showing up, about not letting the world see you bleed. If you needed something, you worked for it. If you were tired, you rested quietly. If you were afraid, you swallowed it and kept moving. That was the language of my childhood, and it taught me early how to stand without leaning on anyone. I did not learn how to ask. I learned how to endure. When I married, I believed I had finally built something solid enough to soften those edges. But life did not ask for my belief before it intervened. My husband became ill slowly, the kind of illness that does not announce itself with drama, but drains you over years. Appointment by appointment, bill by bill. By the time he died, I had already learned how to function in constant crisis without letting it show. Vanessa was still young, too young to understand why her father disappeared piece by piece, and too young to see that when he was gone, I became everything. I was the income, the schedule, the discipline, the calm face that could not afford to break. I went back to work full-time, first as an office clerk, then inch by inch into accounting, because numbers made sense when nothing else did. They did not pity you, they responded to effort and accuracy. I loved my daughter in the only language I trusted, preparation. I paid her school fees on time, every time. I took her to the dentist and the doctor without complaint. I bought her a used car outright, so she would not begin adulthood chained to debt. I did not surprise her with gifts or gush about her achievements to strangers, not because I was not proud, but because pride, to me, was private. I believed then that real love did not need an audience. I believed if I built a stable floor under her feet, she would not need applause to stand tall. But Vanessa grew up in a different world, one where love is often measured by how visible it is. Other mothers hugged in public, posted photos, wrote long captions about sacrifice and joy. I did not. I wore practical clothes. I spoke directly. I did not soften truths or decorate effort with praise. I thought consistency was enough. I thought security would translate into gratitude. I did not realize that to Vanessa, my quiet strength felt like distance. Where I thought I was protecting her dignity, she felt unseen. Where I believed I was respecting her privacy, she believed I was withholding affection. As she got older, I noticed the shift. She compared. She measured. She watched her friends receive help from parents who made it look easy and generous, and she watched me continue to live simply even when I could have spent more. My restraint embarrassed her. My refusal to perform motherhood made her feel ordinary. She wanted to be seen as someone who came from abundance, not discipline, and because I did not need her, because I managed my own life without leaning on her emotionally or financially, she began to feel unnecessary. That is a truth people do not like to admit, that some children resent parents who remain whole. My independence did not make her feel secure. It made her feel irrelevant. I opened my retirement accounts with one promise to myself: I would never become a burden. I had seen what dependency did to families. I had lived through illness and loss and knew how quickly love can turn into obligation. I saved so Vanessa would never have to choose between caring for me and living her life. I did not tell her that every contribution was an act of restraint, that every dollar saved was a way of loving her without tying her down. I assumed she would understand one day. 2 years ago, after a minor fall and a routine eye surgery, Vanessa suggested I sign a limited power of attorney. She framed it as care. She said it was just in case, just paperwork, just to help if I was tired or recovering. I agreed because I trusted her and because I believed preparation was wisdom, not weakness. I never imagined that same document would later be used to question my autonomy. At the time, nothing changed. I still paid my bills. I still tracked my accounts. I still lived independently. And that, I now understand, was the problem. Vanessa wanted to be needed. She wanted to feel like the capable one, the rescuer, the adult in control. My continued competence denied her that role. The more I managed my own affairs, the more she framed it as stubbornness. The more clearly I kept my boundaries, the more she described them as confusion. She began to speak about me as if decline were inevitable, as if it were only a matter of time before she would have to step in and take over. In her mind, my strength was an obstacle to her authority. I endured the small dismissals because I believed love meant patience. I stayed quiet because I did not want to embarrass her or make her feel like she came from hardship. I convinced myself that enduring misunderstanding was the price of keeping peace. What I did not see was that my silence was being reinterpreted as permission. My independence, instead of being respected, was being challenged. And the more I proved I could stand on my own, the more Vanessa seemed determined to prove that I should not. I used to believe that being needed was the same as being loved, and that belief kept me blind longer than I care to admit. It took years to understand that Vanessa did not resent me because I failed her, but because I refused to fail myself. She did not hate my mistakes. She hated my independence. She hated that I woke up every morning capable, coherent, and unwilling to collapse into the role she wanted to assign me. I did not need saving, and to her, that was an unforgivable crime. Vanessa wanted a mother she could rescue, not because I was weak, but because my weakness would have made her feel important. Caleb never raised his voice. That was how he made everything sound reasonable, inevitable, already decided. While Vanessa burned hot and loud, Caleb stayed cool, speaking in careful phrases that framed every violation as efficiency. He liked words like paperwork and process. He liked to say things were just procedural, as if language itself could strip actions of their consequences. He started with sympathy, or something shaped like it. "We are under a lot of pressure," he told Vanessa more than once. Always when I was within earshot. "The notice is serious. Late payments look bad. People talk." He said people the way others say judges, faceless but powerful. He made the situation feel urgent, shameful, and above all public. Every sentence carried the suggestion that failure would not just cost them money, it would cost them standing. When he spoke to me directly, his tone softened, like a man explaining something obvious to someone he believed could not quite keep up. "Jane, this is not personal," he said one afternoon, leaning against the counter as if we were discussing the weather. "It is just paperwork, just procedure." He repeated those words often. Just paperwork, just procedure, until they lost meaning and became permission. It was Caleb who first framed my savings as leverage instead of protection. "Your mother keeps money to control you," he told Vanessa, his voice low and confident, as if stating a fact rather than planting an idea. "If she really trusted you, she would make things easier." Vanessa absorbed that quickly. It gave shape to her resentment. My caution became manipulation. My independence became domination. Every financial stress became my fault by default. If a payment was late, it was because I had not helped enough. If a bill arrived with red ink, it was because I was holding back. Caleb never accused me directly. He did not need to. He spoke in hypotheticals and implications. "If your mom stepped in, this would not be an issue. If we had faster access, things would stabilize." He turned uncertainty into urgency and urgency into justification. The power of attorney became his favorite tool. He referred to it constantly, as if it were a solution to everything. "That document exists to make things smooth," he said. "It helps us handle things quickly, so you are not bothered." He emphasized convenience. He emphasized speed. He emphasized how tiring it must be for someone my age to deal with details. Each comment was delivered gently, wrapped in concern, but the message underneath was clear. My involvement was an obstacle. Soon the questions shifted. They were no longer asking whether I would help. They were asking how to help themselves. Caleb asked for account numbers. He asked what bank I used. He suggested it might be easier if funds were transferred temporarily, just for flexibility, just to avoid delays. He said things like, We can put it back, and this is just until things settle. When I hesitated, he smiled thinly and said, "You are overthinking again." The gaslighting came in layers. If I questioned a request, Vanessa said I was being sensitive. If I said I did not remember agreeing to something, Caleb nodded sympathetically and replied, "Memory can be tricky under stress." If I expressed discomfort, they exchanged looks and spoke about me as if I were not there. She gets like this when she is tired. She worries too much. It is probably her age. Each comment chipped away at the legitimacy of my own perception. What they did not know was that I remembered very clearly the day I signed that power of attorney. It had been 2 years earlier, after a minor eye surgery, nothing dramatic. Vanessa had insisted it was just in case, that it would make her feel better knowing she could help if I needed it. The lawyer had been thorough, explaining limits, safeguards, and something he called an abuse trigger. A clause designed to activate protections if authority was being misused. He had also given me a phrase, a verbal code that could immediately suspend the document if spoken to the right parties. I remembered nodding politely, thinking it unnecessary. I never imagined I would need protection from my own child. That memory returned to me slowly, piece by piece, as Caleb continued to push. He asked more directly now. He wanted passwords. He wanted access. He said it would speed things up. He said it would avoid embarrassment. He said we were all on the same team. Vanessa echoed him, her voice tight with stress. "Why are you making this harder?" she snapped once. "Do you want us to lose everything?" I watched them carefully then. I noticed how Caleb always spoke after Vanessa grew emotional, how he stepped in to translate her anger into strategy. He did not inflame her. He focused her. He turned her fear into momentum. And in doing so, he revealed something important. This was not chaos. This was a plan. The realization settled over me quietly. They were not trying to help me manage. They were trying to remove me from the process entirely. The power of attorney was not a backup. It was a bypass. And the more I resisted, the more they spoke about my stability, my clarity, my ability to decide. That was when I remembered the exact words the lawyer had used. "This clause exists because abuse does not always look like violence," he had said. "Sometimes it looks like a concern." At the time, I had smiled and told him I trusted my family. Sitting there now, listening to Caleb describe efficiency while asking for my autonomy, I understood how naive that had been. I did not confront them. Not yet. I stored the memory carefully, the way I had always stored important things, without announcement. I let Caleb believe his reasoning was working. I let Vanessa believe her pressure was effective. They thought they were closing in. They did not know they were waking something I had spent my life keeping dormant. That night, locked in my bedroom, with no keys and no phone, I replayed every conversation, every phrase, every assumption they had made about my passivity. I thought about the clause. I thought about the code. I thought about how carefully I had been taught to protect myself, and how long I had refused to believe I would ever need to. Caleb believed he had converted family into a system he could manage. He believed he had turned love into leverage. What he did not realize was that systems cut both ways, and by morning, the paperwork he trusted so completely would become the very thing that ended his control. Vanessa opened the bedroom door the next morning without an apology, without hesitation, as if locking me in overnight had been a reasonable step in a process I had already agreed to. She stood aside and gestured for me to come out, her expression tight and controlled, the way it gets when she believes she is being practical rather than cruel. Caleb was already at the table, papers laid out neatly, a pen placed on top like an offering. The house felt different in daylight, not calmer, just more exposed, as if what had happened in the dark now expected to be completed openly. Vanessa did not ask how I slept. She did not acknowledge the night at all. She said, flatly, "Sit down. We need to finish this." I took my time walking to the chair, not to provoke them, but because my body needed to remind itself that I still belonged to me. Vanessa slid the stack of documents toward me and said, "Sign, you owe me." The word owe landed hard, heavy with years of unspoken resentment. Caleb pushed the pen closer, his voice smooth and final. "Once this is signed, Everything settles down. He spoke as if chaos were my fault and compliance were a gift. I looked at the papers without touching them. The language was dense but familiar, financial terms arranged with professional confidence. I asked one question, quietly, evenly. What happens to me in all this? Vanessa did not blink. You are old, she said. What do you need so much for? The dismissiveness in her tone was not new, but hearing it spoken so plainly felt like the last thread snapping. As I flipped through the pages, something else caught my attention. The margins were marked. Dates were filled in. There were attachments referenced that I had never seen. I noticed an email chain printed near the back, drafts to a lender, my name already listed as guarantor. There was a checklist with boxes ticked off, income verified, assets confirmed, appointment scheduled. My stomach tightened as I realized how far this had gone without me. This was not preparation. This was execution. I looked up and met Caleb's eyes. You have already started this, I said. He hesitated for half a second, just long enough to reveal the truth, then shrugged. Whether you sign or not, he said, things are already pretty far along. The sentence hung in the air, careless and revealing. That was the moment the last doubt left me. This was not pressure born of desperation. This was entitlement acting on opportunity. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice rising. Do not do this, she snapped. Do not pretend you are confused. You know what this is. I asked her calmly how they had my signature on documents I had never seen. She waved her hand dismissively. You gave us permission, she said. Stop acting like a victim. Then she said it, the words she would later pretend she never meant. You are not a person in this, she said sharply. You are a tool. Her mouth tightened, as if the thought had been waiting too long to come out. You were always the foundation. Foundations do not get opinions. Something inside me went very still. Not numb, not broken, just finished. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I understood then that if I begged, it would only confirm the role they had assigned me. If I argued, they would call it instability. If I resisted openly, they would escalate. They were counting on my emotion to justify their control. So I did the one thing they did not expect. I closed the folder carefully and aligned the papers. I placed the pen back where Caleb had set it. I looked at them both and said, evenly, give me time. I will do this the right way. Vanessa scoffed. There is no time, she said. We are already late, Caleb added. The lender will not wait. I will handle it through proper channels, I repeated. My voice did not shake. The calm in it seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. Vanessa stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Do not make this harder than it needs to be, she warned. We are doing this. I nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement that the conversation was over. They mistook it for surrender. I could see it in the way Vanessa exhaled, in the way Caleb relaxed his shoulders. They believed the door had closed behind me. They did not realize I had just closed a different one, quietly, permanently. I went back to the bedroom without another word. My heart was steady now. The fear from the night before had burned away, leaving clarity in its place. I understood that I was no longer fighting to be loved. I was choosing to be safe. Whatever happened next would not be decided at that table. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I felt something settle deep inside me, a line I would not cross again. They had mistaken my patience for permission. They had mistaken my love for access. They believed they had taken my dignity. What they did not know was that I had already taken it back, and by the time they realized it, the doors they relied on would no longer open for them at all. Vanessa locked the door again that second night, quieter this time, as if repetition made it reasonable. She took my keys from the dresser, my phone from the nightstand, and said it was for my own good, that I was worked up, that I could say things I did not mean. I did not argue. I watched her hands, noticed how practiced the movements were, how Caleb stood behind her without meeting my eyes. Just sleep, she said. We will talk in the morning. The lock turned with the same dull click, and the sound did not scare me the way it had the night before. Fear needs uncertainty to survive, and by then I understood exactly what they were doing. I sat on the bed and did nothing. I did not bang on the door. I did not call out. I did not pace. I let the quiet stretch, because quiet had always been my ally. What they did not know was that silence had been built into my life deliberately. Years earlier, when I had signed that limited power of attorney after my eye surgery, the attorney had insisted on safeguards I barely noticed at the time. Elder monitoring was one of them. A simple check-in protocol tied to my accounts and medical file, not invasive, not dramatic, just confirmation that I was reachable and consenting. Miss the window, and the system did what it was designed to do. I had never missed it before. That night, I let the check-in pass. I lay awake listening to the house settle, to Vanessa and Caleb talking in low voices down the hall, their words muffled but urgent. I thought about how many times I had been told not to make a scene, not to embarrass my daughter, not to draw attention. And I thought about how little attention it takes for harm to continue when no one is watching. I did not call anyone. I did not need to. The system was already listening. Morning came with the sound of footsteps outside my door and the scrape of chairs being moved in the kitchen. I was sitting upright when the knock came, firm and unfamiliar, followed by a voice asking if everyone was all right inside. Vanessa answered, quickly, too quickly, her tone bright and brittle. She said her mother was confused, that I had been agitated, that they were managing it. Caleb added a layer of concern, talking about stress and memory and how difficult it can be to care for an aging parent. They were good at this, rehearsed without realizing they were rehearsing. The knock came again, closer this time. A woman introduced herself, then another voice joined her, calm, official. They asked to see me. Vanessa hesitated just long enough to give herself away, then unlocked the door with a forced smile. She is resting, she said. She gets overwhelmed. The door opened, and the light fell across the room. I stood up and walked forward on my own. I did not rush. I did not cling to the frame. I met their eyes and said my name clearly. When Vanessa began to speak over me, explaining, apologizing, narrating, I raised my hand slightly and said the phrase I had been told to remember, the one sentence that mattered more than any argument. It was a code, simple and unremarkable to anyone else, but it landed like a switch being flipped. The woman nodded once. The man beside her wrote something down. They asked me if I felt safe. They asked if I had access to my belongings. They asked about the locks, the keys, the phone. Vanessa laughed nervously and said they were just trying to protect me. Caleb said misunderstandings happen. But the questions did not stop. They asked to see the power of attorney. They asked who had control of my accounts. They asked why I had been unable to check in. The room shifted as the answers stopped lining up. I watched as the story slipped out of Vanessa's hands. She tried again, talking about my age, my stress, my confusion. The woman listened and then looked at me. "Do you consent to this arrangement?" she asked, simply. "No," I said. The word felt clean and complete. What happened next was not loud or dramatic. It was procedural. The abuse trigger clause was activated, the one my attorney had insisted on, the one I had never expected to need. The power of attorney was suspended, pending review. Control reverted immediately. Questions became instructions. Keys were requested. My phone was returned. Caleb's explanations grew shorter. Vanessa's voice shook. They were asked why a door had been locked. They were asked why I had been isolated. The answers sounded thin, even to themselves. By the time the officers left, the house felt hollowed out, stripped of certainty. Vanessa stood in the kitchen, staring at the floor, her hands empty. Caleb avoided my gaze entirely. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. The system had done exactly what it was meant to do. Not punish, not accuse, but remove the advantage of control. I gathered my things while they watched, unsure now whether to stop me. I did not tell them where I was going. I did not need to. The truth no longer belonged to them. As I walked out the front door, keys in my hand, phone in my pocket, I understood the full shape of the change that had taken place overnight. I had not called anyone. I had not raised my voice. I had simply stepped out of the silence they were counting on, and the world had answered. Vanessa unraveled quickly, once the locks lost their power. The moment the authorities left and the paperwork began moving without her control, she turned on me with a ferocity that felt almost rehearsed, as if anger were the only language she had left. She cried and shouted in the same breath, her face red, her words sharp and careless. "You ruined my life," she screamed, following me down the hallway as I packed. "Everything was finally lined up, and you destroyed it." She said it like I had set fire to something precious, like I had acted out of spite instead of survival. I listened without interrupting, because it was important for me to hear exactly what she thought she had lost. It was never me. It was never our relationship. It was the money, the leverage, the certainty she believed she deserved. Caleb did not defend her for long. Stress peeled his composure away, layer by layer, until what remained was calculation without polish. He snapped back at her, in front of the caseworker who had stayed behind to finish notes, his voice sharp with accusation. "You told me she would sign," he said. "You said she always caves." The sentence hung in the air, heavy and revealing. Vanessa stared at him, stunned, then furious. "Do not put this on me," she yelled. "You said you had it handled." The arguments spilled out into the open, ugly and unfiltered, their voices rising as they forgot I was even there. They fought about timing, about embarrassment, about how close they had been to approval. They fought about who pushed too hard and who miscalculated. Not once did either of them mention concern for me. Not once did they ask if I was frightened or hurt. The mask they wore as a united front slipped completely, and underneath it there was nothing but resentment and fear of loss. I watched them the way you watch strangers argue in public, with distance and clarity, realizing how little of this had ever been about family. When they noticed the caseworker listening, they tried to recover. Vanessa shifted tactics, her voice cracking into something softer, almost childlike. She said she was overwhelmed, that she had been under pressure, that she never meant to hurt me. Caleb cleared his throat and spoke about misunderstandings, about financial stress, about how easy it is for things to get out of hand. But the damage was already done. The questions that followed were not kind. They were precise. About documents prepared without consent, about access to accounts, about isolation, about the locked door. Every answer opened another gap in their story. I did not need to accuse them. Their own words did that for me. The caseworker took notes, asked for copies, asked for timelines. Caleb's confidence drained visibly as he realized how much of their planning was documented, how many drafts and emails and scanned forms existed without my authorization. Vanessa tried to interrupt, to explain, to redirect, but each attempt only drew more attention to her desperation. The truth did not need my voice. It was already loud enough. When there was finally a pause, I spoke, not to them, but into the quiet that followed their collapse. "I did not destroy your future," I said calmly. "I stopped paying for your contempt." The words were not sharp. They were final. Vanessa froze, as if hearing something she could not argue with. Caleb looked away. That sentence drew a line no amount of emotion could blur. The consequences unfolded without drama. The prepared loan file was flagged. The power of attorney remained suspended. Notes were made about isolation and coercion. No one was arrested. No one was shouted at. Accountability does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with records and follow-ups and the removal of access. I gathered my things while they stood there, no longer sure what they were allowed to say to me. Vanessa followed me to the door, her anger spent, replaced by panic. "You cannot do this," she said weakly. "You are my mother." I turned to her, tired but clear. "Being your mother does not mean being your resource," I replied. Caleb said nothing. He had already retreated inward, recalculating a future that no longer included my compliance. As I stepped outside, I felt no joy in their unraveling. What I felt was relief, the kind that comes when a burden you have been carrying quietly is finally set down. They had believed that love meant access, that family meant entitlement, that silence meant permission. That belief collapsed the moment the money was locked away. What remained was who they truly were when they could no longer take. I drove away knowing I would not need to explain myself again. the truth had already done the work. I met with Martin Hale on a quiet weekday morning, the kind of appointment that does not feel dramatic, but changes everything. He reviewed the suspension of the power of attorney, confirmed its full revocation, and documented the pattern of coercion with calm efficiency. There was no judgment in his voice, only precision. He helped me reinforce my financial safeguards, updated beneficiary designations, and placed layered security on every account. Nothing could move without my presence, my identification, my consent. When he finished, he slid the folder back to me and said, "You are protected now." I realized how rarely anyone had ever said that to me without asking something in return. I did not return to Vanessa's house. I did not need closure from a place that had already shown me what it was. I moved into Silverbrook Senior Community the following week with 2 suitcases and a box of documents, not because I was running, but because I was choosing. Silverbrook was modest and clean, a place that asked me about my routines instead of my assets. The staff learned my name quickly, neighbors waved without curiosity. No one calculated what I could offer. The first night I slept there, I slept through the dark without listening for footsteps outside my door. I set my life into a rhythm that belonged to me. Mornings with coffee and a book. Walks along the paths where people talked about gardens and weather, not leverage and deadlines. I felt lighter, not because I had escaped something loud, but because I had stepped out of something corrosive. For the first time in years, I was not bracing myself. With the help of Martin and my advisor, I redirected part of my savings. A donation to a non-profit that protects seniors from financial exploitation because I knew how quickly quiet people can be cornered. Another to a scholarship fund for women returning to school later in life because independence should never expire. I did not announce it. Giving felt better when it was not demanded. Vanessa called once the dust settled. Her voice was softer, careful, practiced. She said she wanted to talk, to resolve things, to find a way forward. She did not apologize. She spoke about stress, about misunderstandings, about how complicated finances can be. I listened until she paused, then asked her what she wanted from the conversation. The silence that followed answered me. She spoke again, circling back to logistics, to options, to ways things could still be worked out. I told her I loved her and that I would not discuss money again. The call ended without anger, without relief, but with something solid in place. Weeks passed. The urgency that once filled every room receded. I heard through others that the house deal had collapsed, that the marriage strained under the weight of plans built on assumptions. I did not celebrate. Consequences do not require applause. They arrive when they are ready. One afternoon, I stood by my window at Silverbrook and watched the light settle across the courtyard. I thought about the night Vanessa took my keys, about the click of the lock, about how quickly authority can be misused when someone believes they are entitled to another person's future. I also thought about how long I had been preparing without knowing it. The accounts I opened to avoid being a burden, the documents I kept in order, the clause I never imagined I would need. None of it was accidental. It was the quiet work of a woman who refused to become invisible. Vanessa called again months later, asking to meet. I told her I was open to seeing her if we could talk without conditions. She agreed. Whether that would last, I did not know. What mattered was that I no longer needed to trade myself for peace. I learned something important in the aftermath. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers and locks doors that should never have been opened. Sometimes it looks like a small apartment where no one counts your worth. Sometimes it is the simple act of keeping your keys. When my daughter locked me in my room and took them, she forgot one thing. I had been securing my future for years, and by morning, everything had already changed. Before you go, let me leave you with this. I did not share my story to turn pain into spectacle or to paint anyone as a villain. I shared it because there are countless women sitting in quiet rooms right now, holding their breath, believing that endurance is the same thing as love, and that being useful is the same thing as being valued. It is not. Love does not require you to disappear. Family does not get to erase your dignity. And age does not cancel your right to safety, respect, or choice. If you recognized yourself anywhere in my story, if a single sentence made your chest tighten or your thoughts slow, then you are not alone, and you are not imagining it. Your clarity is not cruelty. Your boundaries are not betrayal. Choosing yourself is not abandonment, it is survival. Stories like mine are often buried under politeness and shame, but when they are spoken out loud, they become lifelines for someone else who is still locked behind a door, wondering if anyone would believe them. That is why this space matters. If you want to hear more true stories like this, stories told by women who were quiet for a long time and finally chose themselves, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Your support keeps these voices alive and helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. And remember this, when a grandmother finally speaks, it is not because she is weak. It is because she is done being silent.